Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania for continuing election coverage for South Africa's 2024 national elections, something we started in February last year with the launch of Neil de Beer's United Independent Movement campaign for 2024, months before any other parties got into the fray. Today, I'm joined by a familiar face on the channel. That is none other than Phi Craig, a gentleman from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group who has been on the program several times, including he and I sat down live at the Talon Monument in the Western Cape and had a conversation one day, which was pretty enjoyable. Phil, how's it going? I see that you're now involved with a new party on the scene, the Referendum Party. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, look, absolutely. So look, the Referendum Party is a project of the CIAG. So I'm still with the CIAG. The CIAG is a political lobby group. We came as far as we could at this particular point in time in terms of pushing the Western Cape provincial government towards a referendum on Cape independence. They promised a referendum. The majority want a referendum. Ultimately, they broke that promise, and so therefore we need to get some hard political power to force them to honour their previous promise and to call the referendum that polling says 68% of Western Cape voters want. So the Referendum Party is a single-issue party that's been formed specifically for these elections to put pressure on the Western Cape Premier to force him to call a referendum on Cape independence.
Well, to be fair, a lot of people complain about single-issue parties, but it's not exactly unusual in South Africa to have single-issue parties. I mean, your party is not unique in that standpoint. That's not a positive or negative. I'm just saying that a lot of people make the argument these single-issue parties are a problem, but there are lots of them out there that are focused on one issue, which is an overriding issue, and I presume that's why you formed this party.
Sure. And look, obviously, so excuse me, but in South Africa, we've got a proportional representation system, so therefore, it lends itself to single-issue parties, or because it's the only way you've got. So you've got this situation where you've only got one person in the entire country who has the power to call a referendum on Cape independence. It's not the president; it's the provincial premier. The majority, 79% of his own voters support a referendum. 68% of Western Cape voters in total support a referendum. His party has promised a referendum, and he is refusing to call a referendum. So ultimately, we're in this situation where what do we do? The only logical thing to do is to encourage people to vote against this man, to convince him to put the best interests of the people he's supposed to be serving ahead, and that's why this party comes. So we're not trying to take political power. We're not trying to remove the DA, who are the party of provincial government in the Western Cape. That's not our intention. They've done a relatively good job of governing the Western Cape. We just want to force them to listen to the Western Cape people on this specific issue.
Well, in fact, I believe you're talking about the Democratic Alliance and Alan Winde. That's the party that promised to hold a referendum a number of years ago, and it's yet to materialize.
Correct. Yeah, correct. They promised before. We were through the CIAG, which is a political lobby group, in the run-up to the last municipal or local elections in 2021. We negotiated with the DA that they would call a referendum on Cape. They'd fix some issues with the legislation, which turned out not to be issues at all, and that they would then call a referendum on Cape independence. And then after the election, they reneged on that promise. And ultimately, that all came to a head in October last year, where we got a petition signed by about 30,000 people in the course of a month, and we delivered it to Alan Winde, Premier Alan Winde, and we gave him 7 days. Are you going to call a referendum, yes or no? And he said, I personally, Alan Winde, doesn't believe in Cape independence, so no, he's not going to call a referendum. And then we said, okay, well, in that case, we're putting up the Referendum Party, and we're going to say to voters, well, if you want a referendum on Cape independence, you're going to have to vote for it.
Well, I think there's a number of issues we want to touch on in this conversation today, including geopolitical implications. Get to that a little bit later. But I do want to just touch very quickly on this issue. I did see in the news that your party petitioned or asked to join the multi-party charter, something that I covered last year. I was at the convention at Emperor's Palace when that thing was being negotiated and interviewed the leaders of all the parties, including the very small SNP party. I think it was the SMP. I'm trying to remember exactly. But of course, the UIM, the Inkatha Freedom Party, Action SA, Herman Mashaba, John Steenhuisen from the DA, all of them were there. And they said they had an open tent welcoming others to join them in a similar effort to unseat the African National National Congress. Now, I've read your website, and it appears to be a goal of the Referendum Party as well, to unseat the African National Congress. But your party made an application to join the multi-party charter, and I believe that they said, no, thank you. Did I get something wrong?
They did. They did. No, yeah, that's exactly what happened. We applied to, and it was a quite bizarre situation, but it is what it is. For us, it was always a slightly peripheral issue in terms of our primary issue is in the Western Cape. We are standing nationally for two reasons. One of them is that we want to have to table a change in the constitution around the referendum legislation to precisely prevent the situation we have now, where one man is blocking the referendum. But obviously, and therefore and also we've got voters out, people who support Cape Independence who live outside of the Western Cape, who can't vote for us provincially, but can potentially vote for us nationally. So we decided to stand nationally, and obviously then the logical thing was to assist in removing the ANC. People often say, look, you're focused on the Western Cape, and of course we are, but here was an opportunity for us to do something good and constructive and to help the people outside of the Western Cape remove the ANC. So effectively, this was a goodwill gesture on our part. We did promise our voters when we launched the party that we would vote with the MPC and against the ANC, and we'll still do that. They obviously won't stop us voting against the ANC and for them. But somewhat surprisingly, they came back and said, we don't really want your help. Thank you very much. We'll do without it. So we have this funny situation. We said, well, no big deal. That's fine. We were only offering to help, and actually we're going to help whether you want it or not. But if you don't want us in the club, then fine. We don't have to be in the club. So we're not in the club.
Well, I suspect, without having further information, but just being an analyst and looking at things as a political analyst, that probably for the MPC, it sort of makes sense for them in a strategic position to not let you in the tent for the following reasons. Your party exists for a single issue, which is fine, but that is a referendum for Cape secession, which ultimately means your party is hoping to lead the Western Cape secession. Since these parties all compete at a national level, it would be, I think, probably political suicide for them to say, hey, welcome to the party, welcome to the tent, a party that wants to leave South Africa, and we're trying to take control of South Africa. So not making excuses for them, and not making conclusions for them, but I mean, it would seem to be logical why they would do that. But again, perhaps no harm, no foul, because you intend to vote against the ANC regardless.
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, from our point of view, it was a side issue, certainly not something that we were fussed about. Actually, it was a useful way in that there was a lot of media attention around it, which worked out quite well for us. Look, I mean, the only irony in the multi-party charter, of course, is that one of their stated aims is the devolution of power to the lowest possible level. so you know, and one of our accusations was, well, I'm going to say, it seems to me, or it seems to us, that you want to devolve powers as far down as you can to your elected officials, but not quite as far down as the people themselves. But I mean, look, like you say, as you say, no fair, no foul, and we're not terribly upset about it. It's not a big issue. It was always a side issue for us. They made their choice, and we're not going to fight on it. And we said, look, we'll be the bigger man. We're still going to vote for you. No, let's just move on. We offered our help. You didn't want it. There you go.
Well, we have a common interest, you would say, and a common enemy, and that's enemy, a friend of my, an enemy of my enemy could be my friend, I suppose. Yeah. So that's the situation. But this does beg the question, Phil. We've talked many times. We've had very genial conversations. But here's a question: if the ANC is unseated and a coalition government comes to power, whether you're invited to be part of that coalition or not, if that government moves towards devolution and broader federalism, where would your party stand on that? Would that be something you're comfortable with, or would you still be pushing for the referendum for Cape secession because South Africa is just such a mess?
Yeah. No, look. So look. I think we would take a sort of a nuanced approach to that. So therefore, our goal is absolutely for secession. We think it's the only final solution, and ultimately, anything that kind of leaves power in the hands of a central government, which is likely to be an ANC EFF coalition government, would be disastrous. And there is no future leaving your hands in somebody else when they fundamentally think differently to the way that you think. But actually, we would encourage all efforts that move from where we are now towards. So that's why we've taken part before formed the devolution working group and formally collaborated with parties who want devolution and federalism. Because as Mandela said, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, and it's just important that we move in the right direction, and we certainly would encourage that. So that would be our position. on a more practical level, what's very interesting, and South Africa has this sort of slightly strange situation where the political discourse is dominated by one or two parties, who seemingly, and the DA are one, who obviously a decent party, I'm anti-DA, but actually often their reality is just not checked. So one of the things that they're kind of saying, and even look, let's be clear, the multi-party charter is doomed to fail. It won't even get 40%, never mind 50%. But actually it's important that it tries, but it's not going to be the national government. And Helen Ziller, although many of them haven't admitted it publicly, Helen Ziller has at least had the courage to admit that publicly. So they're not going to be the government. And what they're suggesting here is that salvation for South Africa lies in getting the ANC below 50%. And what's an interesting test case for that, that's exactly what they achieved in Johannesburg in 2021. And in 2021, the multi-party charter, as now is, or the parties of the charter, got the ANC to 34% and the EFF to 11%. So they got them combined to 45%. Which is way more than they could possibly expect at a national level. So that would kind of be the perfect solution. In other words, what the multi-party charter is now selling to South African voters as the perfect solution happened in 2021.
But let me steal your thunder. Gauteng is a disaster. Nothing has gotten better.
Absolutely. Well, and what happened in 2021? Well, in 2023, 2 years later, the DA themselves literally put out a press statement or a call calling to have fresh elections because Johannesburg was now ungovernable, and actually the residents of service delivery had collapsed. And now it was an untenable situation for the people of Joburg. So what they want to happen in South Africa, they got exactly what they wanted. 2 years later, they were begging for fresh elections, saying that everything had collapsed, that it was completely ungovernable. And now they want us to believe that exactly that solution that they couldn't make work at a provincial level, in one city, is now the panacea for all of our problems in South Africa. And it was complete nonsense. It'll be a million times worse. South Africa is this massive, diverse country, and the underlying issue is that people want different things. So the ideas or the things that I and people who think like me are absolutely essential to our survival and fundamental to our entire ideology and way of life. The majority of voters in South Africa want something completely different. We are never, ever going to find a compromise. If they want centralized power, I want decentralized power. They want state-owned enterprises, I want free markets. They want African nationalism and Africa for Africans, I want non-racialism. So and there's no compatibility. We cannot share a government, find some compromise. We just need to go our separate ways because there is no compromise.
No, that's a fair point. I mean, the most prosperous, the largest, the wealthiest province of South Africa is Gauteng, and they had exactly what they asked for, and it failed. It absolutely failed. So, you make a strong point there, and that is that there are diametrically opposed political views about things. And the problem for voters is the Democratic Alliance. I know you're not here to bash the DA, and neither am I, but I'm stating the obvious. The Democratic Alliance is not a they call themselves a neoliberal party, but they are much further left than they claim to be. In their manifesto just came out, they're perfectly comfortable with welfare. Not only are they comfortable, they want to entrench it, make it permanent, and expand welfare. They said nothing about getting rid of state-owned enterprises and turning them over to the free market. And their list goes on and on of their leftist dreams. So that's not much different than what the ANC is talking about. It's a pretty frightening prospect here. So your party, let me ask this question. The ANC is desperately, frantically trying to discredit and remove from the ballot the Umkhonto we Sizwe party that Jacob Zuma has endorsed. They're terrified. And one can understand why if you look at the tea leaves. In by-elections in KZN, for a party that has no manifesto, no headquarters, no declared budget, no constitution, no anything other than they have Jacob Zuma, they contested, they won 21% of the vote in the first by-election. They won 28% in the second by-election in KZN, which is where the ANC is very vulnerable. And now in Mpumalanga province, the ANC got 50%, but the ANC normally gets 80 to 85% in that area. MK got 28% in Mpumalanga, which is not exactly a Zulu stronghold. So the ANC is desperately trying to remove that party. Now, I suspect the ANC probably isn't paying a lot of attention to the Referendum Party, but this is the question for you. Are you, in fact, on the ballot competing in the May 29th elections. Did you get the signatures? Did you fill out the paperwork properly? Are you approved? Will your party be on there where people can vote for you?
So look, it's an interesting question, and I look. There's a lot of information this week has been hectic, and something is at this point in time there are some serious issues around the ballot, and unfortunately I'm not able to talk about them now. We currently busy in legal discussions, and we're probably going to put out a press statement tomorrow, and I don't want to preempt that because I need to speak to our voters and our own team first. But there has been a major development this week with the IEC, which is really let me just call it unhelpful. So where are we as a referendum party? We are currently registered as a party, formally ready to contest the elections. We had to collect a number of signatures to show that we had the requisite level of support. We have collected the requisite number of signatures. The IEC dropped the bombshell on Tuesday. I'm not going to get into more details, and they announced something which potentially would exclude a huge number of parties, of which we would be one. And we are already in the basis of preparing legal action for that. We're consulting with the other parties, and I don't want to say more. Look, I think it'll be resolved because I think the argument is so clear cut, and that's the advice we've got from lawyers, that I think this is going to be a storm in a teacup. But at this point in time, our participation in the elections is under threat, at least theoretically. But I fully expect that to be resolved and for us to contest. And we've met all the requirements. We are a registered party, and yes, I believe we'll go ahead.
Well, thank you for that. That helps so people know that you will be on the ballot. Of course, the issue you're talking about is something I reported earlier this week. A number of parties, Rise, Mzansi, and several others, including the MK Party, have all banded together to protest the declaration of the IEC, calling it unfair and threatening legal action, and that's probably what you're alluding to. We won't go into detail, but the bottom line here is that the Independent Electoral Commission at times, and this is not a comment from the Referendum Party, this is a comment from this political analyst, behaves as if it's not so independent and it's much more a party to ensure the entrenched parties exist. We've proven that with the case of the Forum for Democrats in Northwest Province, where the EFF was erroneously, we don't know that it was intentional, but erroneously awarded a ward seat in proportional representation when someone took 19 votes and wrote it down as 198 in a ward, and therefore defrauded the Forum for Democrats from their seat. When an election analyst identified that, the IEC said foot sec. When I found out about it, interviewed him, and he had already informed that political party, a small party, a Tswana-based party up there in Zeerust. They went to the IEC. The IEC said, it's been 10 days, you're too late. That's not South African election law. They failed to follow election law. And we had to get a non-government organization involved and threaten lawyers. And then in December, 6 weeks after the election, the IEC admitted their mistake and directed Zeerust to remove the EFF counselor and place this other counselor on the town council. They refused. It went to the court in April. They refused. The judge threatened to dissolve the municipal council, and in May, that person was finally placed. So the IEC is not exactly the independent arbiter that they claim to be, and so hopefully whatever's going on with all these parties will preclude the effort to clear the balance sheet of all these parties who are legitimately competing for election. And I hope that it also resolves it for you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, look, and what I can say to our supporters, if they're listening and worried, first of all, please don't panic. And actually, of all the parties that we've spoken to, we are the best place of everybody in terms of we have a written agreement in place with the IEC. And actually, at this point, they haven't honoured the written agreement. And obviously, all we have to do is force them to agree and to honour a written agreement that we already have in place, and then we're home and dry. So yeah, I don't think we have any real issues on our side, which isn't the case for many of the other parties who are many of them have much more serious and perhaps even legitimate issues. So those listening, don't panic. But this does, it's something we've got to go through. It's an unnecessary distraction. It's infuriating, but it'll ultimately be dealt with.
Well, ultimately, it's a waste of time and resources should be devoted to campaigning and bringing people to the standard, right, which is unfortunate. But this is what happens in elections the world over, not just in Africa. So hopefully this will come right for you guys. Okay, so let me ask you this question, Phil. Look, I mean, I'm not throwing stones or anything, but not in your wildest imagination, I'm sure, do you or your party think that you're going to get 50 plus 1% of the vote come May 29th. Nobody's going to get that. So you won't be a party that rules the country. You'll be a small party with, one would hope, on your behalf that you get some seats, either directly or through proportional representation, and you wind up with some seats in Parliament and perhaps even the provincial legislature, and that's the outcome. So then what happens going forward? I know you can't answer it clearly because you don't know who the ruling party will be in this province and who the ruling party be nationally, what coalition there might be. But regardless, if you get some seats in Parliament and the provincial legislature, what would be the plan going forward? Will the Referendum Party seek to bring a measure in the Western Cape, for example, for that referendum? Is that what you plan to do?
Sure. Yeah, look. So ironically, I think we pretty well do know exactly who's going to be governing what. There's extensive polling, and of course, there's so much history that we're not a country that has these radical swings of votes. So. We're targeting for a single issue. We're not targeting, as you say, we're going to nowhere near 50%. We're not expecting. We want 100,000 votes, and we've calculated that 100,000 votes, which is about 5% of the. In fact, it's a bit less than that. It's just under 5%. Of the Western Cape electorate will be sufficient to leverage a referendum on Cape independence, and we're working together with the Freedom Front Plus, and to a certain extent the Cape Independence Party, but more importantly with the Freedom Front Plus and Cape Exit, who are a civic organisation. And we're effectively hunting as a pack. So the intention is that we would like to get the DA to 48% or below, which would realistically leave them in a situation where they're only potential allies, without allying with somebody that would just be untenable, is either ourselves or the Freedom Front Plus, and likely both. And in that situation, we will then form part of the Western Cape government, albeit as a minority part, and both ourselves and the Freedom Front Plus will obviously leverage a referendum on Cape independence as the price of our support of the DA to be the party of Western Cape government. So that's our intention, and 100,000 votes will give us 2 seats in the provincial parliament and 2 seats in the national parliament. And in the provincial parliament, we'll drive an agenda absolutely around the referendum. That's our primary purpose, to force a referendum. But there's a secondary purpose too, which is that the Western Cape Parliament has become effectively a shell of an organisation, because you've the DA are in there. They say they support the decentralisation of power, but actually they just prioritise national interests. And the people of the provincial parliament, the people serving there, have sworn to act in the best interests of the Western Cape people, but they are not doing so. Particularly the DA are acting in the best interests of the DA's interests nationally. We see that obviously particularly around Cape independence, but also around federalism, around devolution. There's lots of issues. So our primary role is to drive a referendum on Cape independence, and our secondary role is to be an absolute disruptor that says to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, our role is to serve the Western Cape people. Our role is not to be good South Africans. Our role is to make sure that the people of the Western Cape's best interests are served. And at times that makes us we should actually be terrible South Africans, because the South African national government is an absolute disgrace, and blind subservience to an immoral, corrupt government is not acceptable. So we will absolutely turn the Western Cape provincial legislature on its head. I expect us to be a really, really uncomfortable partner in there, and I can't wait to start throwing the hand grenade in the room. In the national parliament, then obviously we can't wait to confront the likes of Julius Malema, who had its way far too long. At the end of the day, we are not going to be shrinking violets. We're coming there for a fight. We're going to introduce Cape independence on the national stage. They're going to hate us. We want them to hate us. We're going to be the disruptor. We'll be professional. We'll stay within the law. But actually, we're there to point out to these people that actually they are the racists. They are the terrible people that aren't democratic. And it's time that they're called out. And we're going to come as a party who don't care what they're going to call us. We're not going to be quiet. We are going to come there, and we're going to breathe fire in that parliament. And we're going to table an amendment to the Constitution calling for citizens to be able to instigate referendums in certain circumstances. We want to use the New Zealand model, and that would specifically, which is unlikely, but if we can get that passed, would prevent a situation which we have now, where you get a Western Cape Premier who's refusing to act in the best interests of the Western Cape people, and the Western Cape people then can instruct their Premier under certain circumstances to call a referendum. And that New Zealand model by interest says, if 10% of the electorate wants a referendum on a specific issue, they have 9 months to get to demonstrate they have 10% of the electorate support, and in that situation, then the parliament is obliged to call that referendum, obviously providing it's constitutional.
Well, it's interesting. I think of Star Trek, and of course, in Star Trek, there were aliens like the Romulans who were equipped with disruptors. It sounds like the Referendum Party is seeking to be a disruptor here to keep people on their toes and hold them accountable. That's fascinating. It's also very refreshing for you to share this as leader of the party, that your intent is to shake things up, and you don't mind if people dislike you because, well, frankly, if I infer correctly from what you say, there are some immoral actors who are doing things not in the interest of South Africans, are certainly not in the interest of those in the Western Cape, and that's what you're hoping to disrupt.
But there's not just a few actors. There's a whole. Let's not mince our words. There's a whole lot of really disgusting, vile people who don't deserve to be in Parliament, aren't democratic. They're racist, and actually they sit there collecting salaries that they couldn't possibly get anywhere else. It's a disgrace that they're even there. They are there, and they need somebody to put them in their place and tell them what a disgrace they are. And actually, too many people are. One of the problems in South Africa, particularly amongst groups that are outside of the sort of political majority, is that they've been cowed into silence, and actually their silence almost becomes complicitness. And it's time that we get off the ropes. We come out and we start saying, Julius Malema, don't talk about racism. You are the biggest racist in South Africa. You shouldn't be here. If we run this country, you'd be in jail and not in Parliament. And he's not the only one. I mean, frankly, most of the ruling party should be in jail and not in Parliament, and it needs to be said. Not going to be popular. Well, it's not going to be popular with the Parliament. It's going to be very, very popular with our voters, and we can't wait to say it.
Folks, you're listening to a conversation with Phi Craig of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, but today in his role as leader of the new Referendum Party based in the Western Cape, and that begs a question as well. Phil, you will be on the ballot. So if people live in Northwest, or they live in Gauteng or KZN, and they're sympathetic to your party, they like it, and they realize they won't get represented necessarily, they'd still be able to vote for you to help draw votes to your standard, even though you're focused on the Western Cape. Is that correct?
In the national ballot. So in this election, there'll be 3 ballots for the first time ever. There's a provincial ballot, and will only be on the provincial ballot in the Western Cape. There's a regional ballot, and will only be on the regional ballot in the Western Cape. But on the national ballot, we will be in every province. So people in every province on the national ballot can vote for the Referendum Party. And we expect a substantial amount of support, both nationally and internationally, from people who understand that the only way that we can save South Africa, or parts of South Africa, for people who think like us, the ideological minority, the people who are Western leaning, the people who are traditionally Western leaning, not the new type of West, people who are free marketeers, people who are genuine non-racialists. There are a lot of people who think like us, and we want to create an ideological homeland in Africa, in Southern Africa, for people who think like us, irrespective of race. And there are a hell of a lot of people throughout the country who are saying, well, look, you know what, if you can create a country for people like us, then we'll vote for you and we'll come and live there when you create that country. And we want those people. We want to create, look, large parts of South Africa, not all, but large parts of South Africa are lost to African nationalists. Can't be saved. That's just the reality. But certain parts can be saved, and the easiest to save is the Western Cape. And we need to create, can I use the expression, almost a Israel for the Jews, a homeland for the people, the ideological people who think like us, and so that they have somewhere. And even if you're now living in Pretoria or you're living in Durban, if you're one of us, you now have an ally next door, somebody who thinks like you, somebody who's going to want to protect your best interests, and a refuge in a time of crisis. So an independent Western Cape has a lot of benefits for a lot of people in South Africa, and we expect to get a lot of votes on that national ballot from outside of the Western Cape. In fact, interesting, we're going through our submissions now to Parliament, and as of today, 29% of the people who've endorsed the Referendum Party are outside of the Western Cape. 71% in, 29% out.
Now, that's interesting. That's why I asked the question. But, I mean, here's another question, Phil. Jacob Zuma recently talked and bemoaned the fact that South Africa is based on Dutch Roman, Roman Dutch law. Would you be willing to base a Western Cape on African law? traditional laws. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. Jacob Zuma, of course, whenever he gets in trouble legally, he complains about the legal system. But the reality is that the system he's talking about does not exist. There is a process that was normal, but there are many processes amongst many different ethnic groups across Africa. There was no African system of law as such.
Yeah, look, and of course, one of the things that we're fighting for self-determination. We're fighting self-determination for us, which is kind of an ideological-based self-determination, civic nationalism. But there are other groups, and we want South Africa to break up. So actually, if we look at the Zulu population, clearly they've got a history, they've got a heritage, they've got a way of living. We absolutely support Zulu nationalism, and so we would be all too delighted to see a Zulu state develop itself and to be governed according to the democratic will of Zulus or whatever traditional value system they want. We don't want to dictate to other people how they must live. We just want to make sure they're not allowed to dictate to us either.
No, that's fair. Listen, I've been saying for a long time that, of course, I've interviewed you, I've interviewed Hein Marks, Des Palm, all from groups that are advocating for Western Cape Secession, United Liberty Alliance, the Cape Exit, and the Cape Independent Advocacy Group. I've interviewed all you guys, and I've said for a long time that, in my view, I think it's highly likely that there'll be a Zulu secessionist movement successful before Western Cape because of the intransigence of the Democratic Alliance, who promised a referendum. I think it's possible that might still happen. But let's go ahead and shift before we run out of time here, Phil. It's a topic that I think that people would want to hear about. You and I have talked several times about secession. We've talked about Catalonia. We've talked about the Velvet Divorce in the Czech and Slovak republics. We've also talked about other secessionist movements around the planet. And what are the geopolitical implications for your party? Are there geopolitical implications that your party exists, its goal to achieve this, and perhaps maybe if you want to touch on it again, the geopolitical implications of a successful Western Cape secession? You want to address those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that's really interesting is how the world has changed in the last 2 or 3 years, and in a way that is very unfortunate for many people. And I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. And certainly, but one of the byproducts of that is that it's been incredibly helpful to the Western Cape secession. So what we've ended up creating is this the world has become much more binary. You've seen this polarization around Russia, Ukraine would be one issue. Israel, Palestine. There's lots of things that are going on, which are fundamentally changing. And South Africa has, unfortunately, perhaps for us, fortunate, has made itself very, very unpopular in certain sections of the world. And this ideological difference, we've always been pointing out this ideological difference to people, and it's been often hard for people to visualize it. Suddenly, you've got the South African national government holding military exercises with Russia and China, whilst the Western Cape provincial government is painting the town all up in yellow and blue of Ukraine. You've got South Africa taking Israel to the ICJ, and you've got the Western Cape government, distancing itself from that. And these things have all started. So politically, first of all, we see those differences, and then the consequence of that is we've seen now the limitations, obviously, the Suez Canal, which effectively is not operating and the way that it previously operated, and now, for argument's sake, is under the control of BRICS. And you now have the Cape Sea Route, which effectively is also under the control of BRICS. So now all of the sea routes around Africa are under the control of BRICS, and unquestionably that's helpful in terms of the US. The West looking at the map of the world and thinking, well, my goodness, Cape independence is fundamentally going to change that dynamic. And if the West wants, I can't say a foothold, because obviously an independent Western Cape isn't going to be a puppet for the West. It's going to be an independent state. but clearly it isn't going to be antagonistic to the West in the way that South Africa is, and that opportunity then to have an ally on this key sea route and the only realistic alternative to Suez has become very, very significant. And I understand that there's a concerted effort now by particularly the US to try and maintain a bit more of a foothold on Africa, and understanding that much of Africa is falling under the influence of Russia and the Chinese. So I think Cape Independence becomes hugely significant, and that makes it, certainly when we get to the point of international recognition, immeasurably easier. We were always confident of international support. Now we are absolutely 100% certain of it, and that's a great thing to have in our back pocket.
Well, you make an interesting analogy there, a point that I think a lot of people miss, and that is, in fact, that with Egypt joining BRICS, although I dismiss BRICS, I mean, I also covered that. I was at the BRICS summit in Santon City. I've dismissed it for a long time. BRICS is China. There's no BRICS. 85% of the GDP is China. Russia is a non-factor. Were it not for the fact that if it has nuclear weapons, nobody would pay any attention to Russia. It has no impact on the world beyond that. That's a little bit of overstatement, but not entirely. Brazil, India have never fulfilled their potential. They're perpetually promising to be the great next thing. India is the largest democracy in the world, yet is still an economic laggard despite that. So BRICS, yes, but as a political grouping which has no treaty amongst it, has no even economic agreement, no military agreement, no collective security, it's a fantasy, but that fantasy does get people's attentions. And if they agree to work together informally against Western interests, you make a very good point. Well, first off, the South China Seas patrol, and the Scarborough Shoals, the Paracel Islands, the Spratly Islands, all of that stuff illegally occupied by the Chinese, building military bases there for ships and for aircraft. That's a problem. They're active there. They are also, as you mentioned, now with Egypt in control of the Suez Canal. If the Houthis let ships through, that's another point. And with South Africa being a BRICS member, that as well. But I would say this one thing. You make a good point about being geopolitically important. But until the shrinking U.S. influence around the globe as a consequence of Joe Biden's inept, moronic foreign policy, the United States, whether by choice or just by reality, has been the world's policeman in the sea lines of communication. It has been the U.S. that has kept shipping safe and free in the Persian Gulf, around the Gulf of Aden, in the Red Sea, in the South China Sea, despite China's actions, in the Straits of Malacca, and even around Africa, although our presence is much less around the southern tip of Africa. But the point is that the U.S. Navy has been the guarantor of the sea lines of communication. Will we do that in the future? I don't know. The Chinese are certainly making a play to challenge us. Geopolitically, it's a real issue. But you make a very good point, which I've heard almost no analysts talk about. A independent Western Cape could be a potential non-antagonistic friend to countries in the West. And for the global economy, that is no small feature. That's an important feature. And I think that maybe people should consider that.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, no, I was looking over here at the chat. We've got a number of people here. Erica says that she doesn't trust the DA, and she says, convince me. My vote's still up there. That's interesting, as Erica once was floated as a member of parliament for the ACDP, but she turned it down. Erica now lives in the Western Cape. She's moved over there within sight of that eyesore of a refinery that's outside Cape Town there. But she's over there, and you've got a number of people who are supporters of your party. They're here. I don't know that there's anything more you can say, or maybe you've got a pitch to people come to your standard. You made it pretty clear from my perspective so far, but we've got a few minutes left. I know you've got to run, you've got an appointment, and I've also got a noontime engagement. So let me give you a chance, Phil, if there's anything you want to add to talk about the Referendum Party, to draw people to vote for you guys on the 29th. We did have a question earlier about someone say, did you get the 14,000 signatures? Actually, it's 15,000 if I'm not mistaken they needed, but Phil said they did have those, and it looks like they'll be on the ballot. They've met the requirements. There's just a little niggle that's going on with the IEC that can't talk about right now. But anyway, any final comments or thoughts you might want to have to bring people to your standard?
Sure. Now, look, perfect. Well, look, I think one of the things that would be very, very interesting for us. So what's the position of the Referendum Party? Obviously, we're fighting for Cape Independence, but it's beyond that, because Cape Independence is obviously a means to an end. And I think we're focusing our campaign this year on something called the two futures, our two futures message. And that is, look, literally, as we sit here going into the 2024 elections, there are two possible futures that we can have as voters. One is that we can live in a South African failed state. South Africa is inevitably going to fail. There's not going to be a correction. The multi-party chart is not going to...
I have to correct you and interject. It's already a failed state. Sorry.
It's already a failed state. Okay. Okay, so the Western Cape at this point has escaped the worst of that, but it won't escape the worst of that. So in the Western Cape, option one is that we can have a genuinely failed state future, and option two is that we can live in the first world. We can create a first world country where suddenly we turn around our situation. We start creating economic growth. We get on top of crime. We create jobs and so on. And these are these two very different futures. And how people vote in 2024 is going to determine in absolutely which one of those two realities becomes theirs. And I think that's an easy thing to sell. One of the questions that we ask people in our rallies is, well, do you think if everybody in the Western Cape votes for the ANC, you'll end up with a first world future? And of course, everybody laughs because they know that's the case. Then the key question comes, well, what do you think if everybody in the Western Cape votes for the DA? Do you think you're going to end up with a first world future? And of course, people then dawns on them that they aren't. The DA have been in power for 15 years in the Western Cape with an outright majority, and we're still going backwards because the DA cannot fundamentally deliver the future that people want, this first world future that's non-racial, everything's functional, a vibrant economy. And the problem is not really with the DA who've done a good job of running the Western Cape. It's the fact that we're trapped in a system where the Western Cape people never get what they vote for, and we can't make any of our own decisions. So that's the realization that we want people as a party to see. And we have this slogan that says, a DA government in Cape Town can't save you when an ANC government in Pretoria is making all of the decisions. And that's the reality. That so we're not even trying to remove the DA from power. We're trying to say actually to DA voters or traditional DA voters, look, come vote for a better future. You have to change the system. If you don't want to end up living in a failed state, then we have to get control of economic policy. We have to get control of our borders. We have to get control of taxation. We have to be able to get rid of race-based policy. We have to do all of these things, and we cannot do them in the current system of government. The only way that we can get control of those things is through Cape independence, and Cape independence is just a means to an end. It's a means that make their own decisions so that we can turn around our part of the country. We'd love to do it in the rest of South Africa, but it's not possible. There's only one province where this is possible. That's the Western Cape. We've got one opportunity, and it's now. And that's what we'd say to people. Vote for the Referendum Party now. Vote for a first world future, because we then can deliver this, the future that people really want. And if we don't do it now, then with everything that's going on in South Africa, then the opportunities will be lost forever. In 10 years' time, there's going to be no, oh, well, look, wish we'd voted Cape independence, let's go back. By that point, that Western Cape is going to be overrun with refugees from the rest of South Africa. Our economy is going to be destroyed, our infrastructure is going to be destroyed, and actually we'll no longer have political hegemony in the Western Cape, and it'll be gone then. So it's now or never. And that's why people should vote for the Referendum Party. You'll still end up with the DA government, whether you like it or not. We're certainly not going to vote with the ANC. But actually what we will get you is this referendum on Cape independence that allows you to have a first world future and not to be living in a failed state.
Well, that's actually excellent points. Thanks for sharing that. It's also a very realistic point of view. It's interesting because you see the climate zealots talking about climate change is the reason Cape Town had water issues. And I saw a Washington Post article written this week claiming that there are water issues. Again, when we saw the levees in the reservoirs at over 100% overlapping last year because of rains. And the reality is that the influx of people in the Cape Flats and into the Western Cape in general has sextupled the population in the metropolitan area in a century. And it's also a population that per capita uses exponentially more water per liter per person than a population that was non-industrialized in 1910 used. And so it's not global warming, it's not climate change, it's misuse of water resources. And the more people pour in there, the worse it's going to get without some improvements. It's interesting that the global media like to tell their fairy tales, but that one I saw yesterday, I thought I'd share that. So Phil, that's excellent. We appreciate that. I know you've got to run, I've got to run as well. We'll get you back on, perhaps and see how it's going before the elections if you'd like to come back on. And 100,000, that's that's an interesting goal. Well, I'll tell you what, I'd love to have 100,000 people vote for me, but that isn't going to happen. There's only 47,000 registered voters in my district, so I'm trying to carve out enough of that to win the primary and then go on to the general election. But anyway, so Phil Craig, once again, always a pleasure to chat with you. If I get back there for the elections in May, perhaps we can do an in-person brief interview or something and on the campaign trail and see how things are going. Thanks a lot for your time. It's always a pleasure, and best of luck on the Referendum Party. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it, and good luck with your campaign too. I'm sure you'll do a stunning job, and I hope that people can see the wisdom of voting for you. I'm sure they will.
Well, I hope so, but I don't have broadcasters rushing to me. The television station that covers this region contacted me last week, and they didn't know it was me. They wrote to the email address and said, we'd like to talk to the team for candidate Wyatt. We'd like to get some more information. And I wrote back, and I haven't heard from them. So, so that didn't go so well. Anyway, all right, folks, Phil Craig from the Referendum Party, and there you have it. More of our election coverage for 2024. Take care of yourselves. We're going to drop off now, and have a lovely day. God bless, folks. We'll catch you here next time on the program. Thanks, Phil. Cheers.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers. Bye.
All right, so that's Phil Craig. That's going to wrap it up here, folks. I've got to run for another engagement at noon. And yes, it's related to my election, sort of, not really. But anyway, so thanks a lot, everybody. I know I didn't get to everybody's questions. We did our best. There's nothing wrong with being contrarian. John Jarvis is a contrarian. And he said that Phil's dreaming. That's John's view on it. The reality is that this sort of thing has happened before. Czechoslovakia broke in two. Eritrea left Ethiopia. Western Sahara is likely to become a semi-autonomous province of Morocco sometime soon. So it's not far-fetched. Now, as far as South Africa owning everything in the Western Cape, it's nonsense. You negotiate that out. The biggest problem for South Africa is losing its only real naval base at Simonstown. So they'll have to figure that one out because Durban is not going to cut it as the naval base. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot for being here. We'll catch you tomorrow on the program. And don't forget, this weekend we've got United Rugby Championship action back up on Rugby Ascendant. South African teams are playing once again. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for your patronage. God bless and have a lovely day.